Okay, welcome, and thank you for joining us. Very excited to be bringing another episode of the Jane by Rivulus Irrigation Training Series. And today we're going to be talking about something I think is very important to all of us involved in irrigation, and that is the future of irrigation. Each year, I really feel like each day, almost each hour, there seems to be more pressure on the industry to do more about conservation, really kind of prove what we're doing are the right things, that we care about conservation, and that we're managing water properly. So when I started to think about this, one of the first people that came to mind to actually talk about this was our guest today, Lance Sweeney. Lance founded Sweeney and Associates over 40 years ago. I'm always amazed at this. He got his first certifications for irrigation and auditing back in 1990. I mean, that was so many years further than it was cool to be involved in water conservation. So, and if you don't know Lance, I just want to say his company and he have done projects all over the world, Saudi Arabia, UAE, China, and then a ton of great projects here in the United States. A couple that I've gotten to tour with Lance that are always very impressive when you get his firsthand knowledge and experience. The Getty in particular was one that you guys did the gardens outside the Getty, and that is just something really spectacular to see. I think you guys did that maybe over 20 years ago now. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Back in the early 90s.
Yeah.
So,
So
yeah,
I think that was really one of the projects that really launched your career.
it
Um,
was what put us on the map for sure.
yeah. So I've done some articles about you, Lance. I was reading the one I did back in 2016 about how I work, and it's funny. Everybody should take a look at that after the webinar. But it talks about some of the technology you use in 2016, and today we think, oh man, that's kind of old technology. It happened really quick. That wasn't that long ago. But you can see that, and that's fun to see. You did a webinar with us a while back, a few years ago, where we talked about capturing rainwater on your property and what that looks like. It's fabulous, popular. So I'm really glad that you're back joining us today and giving us this knowledge and information.
Happy to be here, Richard.
Yeah. So Lance, the first thing I want to ask you, though, you're a board member of the ASIC, the American
Society of
of
Irrigation.
Irrigation Consultants, right? I knew I could do that. And you guys just had your annual meeting a few weeks ago, right?
Yeah, in Scottsdale back in April.
Yeah. So, Lance, I just wondered if there was anything that came out of that meeting. I mean, these are really some great minds of irrigation assembled together. Anything that came out of that meeting that you thought, wow, this is something people should be really thinking about right now?
I think the biggest thing that comes to mind is the push with new regulations and municipal agencies pushing to really eliminate irrigation if possible and reduce it. And the drumbeat for water conservation is strong, and a lot of people who are on the water conservation side of things, where all they look at is how do we save water, how do we save water, they look at us in the landscape industry as kind of enemy number one. Why are we throwing all that water out into the landscape? And I think that's really shocking, because I don't think a lot of them take into account the quality of life that landscape provides in our cities and in our communities. It reduces heat island effects. Just the feeling that you get when you're walking through a nicely landscaped community versus something that's all concrete and brick and things like that. And I think that really is something that needs to be taken into account. And I think they kind of shortchange us. And I think we ought to be all working toward, showing people and our elected officials that landscaping and the irrigation that supports them is important to us.
I think you're so right, Lance. And, I've spent the last 20 plus years of my life really focused on water conservation in landscape. And the thing that has really become a hot button for me, and I'm really noticing this more in the last 4 or 5 years than I have in the prior 15 or so, and that is this focus on if we get landscape to reduce, we're going to solve the water problem. But for instance, here in California, where I live, total water used by urban landscapes is about 8.5 or 9% of the total water. So even if we eliminated all of it,
Right.
and believe me, I'm for conservation and landscape, but even if we eliminate all of it, it's not going to make anywhere near the dent that we need to do. And so my concern is that people think, well, if we can just get landscape, we'll be fine. And
Correct.
there's so much more to do. But I don't know why that target has really hit the landscape industry's back.
I think because I think partially because it's something people see all the time, right? You know, you see the water use going on in the landscape, and you think it must not be good. A lot of the other uses of water you don't see; they're hidden away in different parts of the state, and you know, you just don't see them. So
Yeah.
the average person reacts to what they see each and every day. And,
Right. That's such a good point. So anyway, moving forward, I just want to talk about, technical advancements or innovations in irrigation that you see happening now that might get more popular, or you're hearing about that may be popular in the next 3 to 5 years.
right. Well, there's a lot of things that we've seen in the last few years that I think are getting stronger and more prevalent in the industry. And, you know, everything from piping systems, we're starting to use and see a lot more acceptance of high density polyethylene pipe for main lines. And from a water conservation end of things, you can reduce leaks in main lines tremendously using these high density polyethylene main lines because they're 100% heat fused, they're monolithic systems, and they just don't leak like PVC lines have a tendency to do, especially in larger mainline systems. So we're seeing that become more and more accepted. The prices for that have dropped much closer to what PVC pipe installation is now, and so it's becoming accepted. Seen a lot more cloud-based central systems, automatic adjusting controllers, Wi-Fi, even homeowner Wi-Fi systems where you can check your phone to see what your irrigation's doing. And I think that's kind of bringing that whole smart home thing full circle, or even covering the landscape outside now. And that's becoming, very popular. And of course, it's required in California to have a smart controller. So that's there. Two wire continues to grow. I see a lot more two wire systems. The cost is getting much closer to conventional wire systems, and that's good news. And then we've seen there's a company out called Thrive EVO that actually has a wireless control system now, and it's an add-on to your controller where you can control 4 valves up to 200 yards from your controller without having any wires there. And kind of that's a retrofit product right now, but they're looking to take that technology to the point where we won't have wires in the landscape anymore. And I think that's really a great improvement because broken wires are the leading cause of valve failures in the field. And so if we can eliminate the wiring, that would be a big help. Plus it's a reduction of copper that's being used for so many other things in the world. So that's a good thing.
Yeah,
And
so many follow-ups to what you said. Sorry to interrupt, but
no, go ahead, please.
so the high density polyethylene piping, right? I was going to mention earlier, right? We know that a Stanford study has told us that 20 to 50% of the water going through our water systems infrastructure is leaking. And 20 to fit, let's just use 20. That's low hanging fruit, right? But you don't see it, like you mentioned. Is this going to help with that particular stat? Is that possible?
Well, I know that a lot of cities and municipal agencies are switching over to, when they do new installs, they're putting in high density polyethylene pipes. And you got to remember, Los Angeles still has some wooden pipes in their system. And we saw that a couple of years ago when they went to their, every other day watering regime, and everyone jumped on, and watered in mass quantities, and and it caused high flows, and that caused some pipe breaks. And some of the pipes they were actually finding that were broken were old wooden pipes, kind of like hot tub type situations. So there's a wide range of materials out there, everything from, like I said, wood to steel to AC concrete. So yeah, the new stuff I think is all pretty much going in now, HDPE, and we're pushing it for all large mainline systems, parks and schools, things like that, where you can actually get 100% leak-free system in your mainline using that product.
Yeah, I think that's such great news. I think that's a big step in the right direction. You mentioned smart controllers and legislation in California. I see that Colorado and Nevada are also going to follow suit on that. I think in 2024, they're going to go that way. And then, you mentioned something about two-wire systems being more expensive than conventional. Did I hear that correctly?
They used to be, but the prices are coming much closer. It used to be you could justify a two-wire system if you had over 50 valves, but I think now you can start seeing it, being cheaper than conventional wiring systems, conventional wired systems down into the high 20s. So it's just that when you start looking at all the wire you have to put in on a conventional wire system, and the wire costs have gone up substantially, the two-wire systems are starting to become cost competitive with those. And I also think that the contractors who install those now fully understand them. Whereas a few years ago, there was a reluctance to jump on and start using them because they felt they were overly complicated. But we're all used to them now.
Right, right. Decoder is a word in everybody's vocabulary now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So, Lance, we got a question coming in from one of our viewers, and they're asking, how do you adjust the smart controller to adhere to drought restrictions?
Yeah, well, every controller is different, of course, and a lot of them have a percentage adjustment where you can actually dial down the amount of water applied by a percentage feature on the controller. So that's one way to do it, probably the easiest way. Because the whole idea, I mean, I personally feel that if you have a smart controller, you should have a little more leeway, because you're generally then, if you're using it and programming it correctly, you're applying what those plants needs. And those controllers were really mandated because the old controllers that people would set once a year and let them run all year long, they were wasting water all throughout the times a year that you didn't need the extra water. So I think that we're forcing the industry to go into these smart controllers. But if you're going to start making us reduce down below what the plants are actually needing, then we're looking at plant losses and stuff. But anyway, the answer to the question is with a percentage adjustment decrease.
Yeah, it's very interesting too. We had a customer in Fresno who wanted to water turf during the drought restrictions. And so we were able to make the argument that, a 0.65 of ET was acceptable to water other plants. What if we watered the turf to 0.65 of ET, a actual setting we could put in our Jane Unity controllers? And, the city was happy with that. The customer was happy with that. The turf didn't look great, but it looked okay.
It didn't die.
Yeah, and I'm mentioning this because this is even something that the cities are getting a little bit more sophisticated, right? That's a pretty sophisticated concept, 0.65 of ET for turf, and they were good with it. So I think that's a good thing.
That is good. It is good.
Yeah. So, Lance, thinking about climate change, right? This weird winter we had, the weird summer we're having, right? It's still winter here in Southern California. I know you're warm up there. How is this going to affect irrigation strategies and water management practices going forward?
Well, it certainly drives a lot of legislation. We're seeing two big things being pushed through right now in the state of California. Both have been passed on from the Assembly to the Senate. One of them is Assembly Bill 1573. It's actually a biodiversity ordinance that they're pushing through, where they're going to require non-residential projects to eventually have 75% of their landscape plants be native to the local area where the project is being built. So right now there's always been a push to use native plants, and then also low water use adapted plants. But what they're pushing now for is for us to use plants that are only native to the local area. And that's because they're concerned about bees and birds. And, if we put too many non-native plants in, those bees and birds maybe don't react well, don't utilize those plants as well as that. All seemingly very valid concerns. But, at the same time, we've been pushing for the development of low water use plants at these nurseries. And they've been bringing out all these great plants that we all love to see in the landscape. But that's going to change that will change significantly the look of our landscapes in the future. It also eliminates the use of any turf in non-residential areas. Which is part of the new WELO. If you look at the new draft WELO that they're putting out, they're saying no turf at all in non-residential areas. So
Yeah, so yeah, it can be a little frustrating, right? Especially for residents of places like Malibu or Santa Monica. And it takes away from the good work the industry has done. Now, I've often said I say it often. It's not what you water, it's how you water. And we're seeing a lot of gains in the reduction of water waste through systems. So I'm just wondering, are you seeing any other emerging trends or developments in precision irrigation that you think are going to gain prominence as a result of this?
Well, I think we're seeing more and more of the acceptance of subsurface drip irrigation, both in tube form and mat form. There's a couple of mat products out on the market that are really good as far as really creating high efficiency application methods. They, in the right application, they're wonderful, and we've used them in many locations. You're watering 100% of the ground surface with a mat, and so your efficiencies are really high. But because the mat spreads the water quickly and efficiently, it really is an efficient way to irrigate, which is what we're striving for, getting that efficiency as high as possible. But tubing has really become popular. You slowly over the years, we've been using tubing now for 25 plus years, and it started out being a fight every time, and then slowly it started to get more and more accepted, and it's almost become routine. As a matter of fact, the new WELO specifically calls out for subsurface drip irrigation in areas less than 10 foot wide. So that's
which is, I think, progress. And certainly what we're experiencing or seeing is that, the mat products, I agree with you, are good. We're also seeing closer emitter spacing, giving you more of a channel of water instead of seeing the circles that you would see before.
Right.
So
that's based on soil texture too, though. So remember, you can actually put too much water into a clay soil, and we've seen that where you go through an area that happens to be in California, as we all works in California knows, on a site you could have a couple different soil types going on. Unfortunately, it's not all even, and you'll see an area that maybe is particularly high in clay, and the water will actually surface before it'll pull into the soil. So some of the strategies are in those clay soils is to apply the water slower to give the clay soils time to absorb it. So yeah. But no, drip irrigation is still going to be the leading application method of choice in the industry, and I think for a long time to come.
Yeah. And I think you make a good point too about the soils, and right. And it just kind of emphasizes how complex this is, but we're having to pay more attention to it as a result of what's happening with water. So as far as water scarcity and ways to improve irrigation systems that everybody's focused on, or additional measures or laws, do you have any thoughts about what you'd like to see in the next 3 to 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, I like to see. I'd love to see more use of recycled water in the industry, and I'd like to see them maybe take a little more time to look at the quality of that recycled water. We all hear about recycled water being salty, and and some plants don't do well with it, and that's certainly true. And some agencies have saltier water than others. I'd love to see some standards, that they can produce water that won't be a detriment to the planting. You look at some of these systems that put out 700 part per million total dissolved solid water, and you end up getting salt crust on the ground when you use it. And we all want to conserve water, but give us something we can use that's not going to hurt our landscapes. So I'd like to see some improvement in that. We're seeing a huge push as water becomes more scarce to go to alternative water sources, certainly rainwater harvesting and stormwater harvesting and condensate harvesting. Gray water, I'm happy to use gray water. I think that the problem with gray water is you have to be pretty much have bought into the whole concept, because if you go and you start using gray water in your landscape and you're pumping your used washing machine water out, and you've been using Tide or something like that in there for detergents, all those things that really work to pull soils out of your clothing, they don't do real well in the soil. They continue to work and break down soil, and we don't want to see that. So I think treated gray water is really the way to go if you're going to use gray water. And we're seeing projects where they're collecting the gray water from the site and processing it on site for use in the landscape. So that's nice to see, and we like that.
Yeah. So the filtered gray water, is that really expensive?
Filtered isn't, because you can just filter it. It's the treatment that starts to get expensive, because if you're just filtering it, all you're doing is removing hair and lint and anything else that might have gone into the system. But it doesn't take anything that's dissolved out of there. And you see some people who are really pro gray water, and and they're willing to use low sudsing products for their washing machines, things that are really bio-friendly and eco-friendly and all that. But nothing scares me more than someone coming and tell me they're going to go and put in a collect gray water from an apartment housing project for use in the thing. You have no control over what goes in. All those things you use on your hair to get that great hairdo, those things all work against you in the soil when they come out in the gray water. So
Yeah, what a great point, right? I hadn't thought about that, but right, the apartment, when you said you have to be all in,
yeah,
and I think a lot of people will be, but that's a great point.
Absolutely. There's a lot of people that are, and we see them trying to collect everything possible. We're doing a project right now where they are collecting condensate and they are collecting gray water, and they're going to treat the gray water. And then we're seeing a lot of stormwater water collection. That's really more driven by the fact that the cities don't want you releasing the stormwater into their stormwater system because it's already at capacity. And so we're being forced to use that in the landscape. I'd like to see us be able to store that water a little longer, maybe do a little bit of treatment on it, because unfortunately, a lot of these systems, they design them to capture half an inch or 6/10 of an inch of water, and then it's going to rain again in a week, and they want to get all that water out of the system into the landscape that already got rained on, and it doesn't need the water. So we end up using the irrigation system as a disbursement for the stormwater, which I don't think is really it doesn't really conserve water in that respect. All it does is get rid of the stormwater.
Right. Interesting. One thing I've talked to you about before was Saudi Arabia. Now they have a lot of desal there, right? And in fact, they're actually very water challenged. I think everybody thinks of Saudi Arabia as just a very affluent country. They have all the water they need, and it's actually not the case. There's many people that don't have water every day, all day. Now, with their desal, are they using the desal water for plants?
They're not. They don't really want to use it for plants, and they try not to. That most of the work we do in the Middle East countries are using what they call treated sewage effluent, or TSE water. It's their version of a recycled water product, and that's required for use on all landscapes. I'm not saying no plants get watered with desal water, but I think 99% of it's all captured sewage and then treated for use in the irrigation.
Yeah.
And that's the standard over there.
Right. So who drinks the desal water?
What's that?
Who drinks the desal water?
Everybody drinks
everybody.
The desal water. If you go over there, you'll drink the desal water. Yeah. That's how they get their water supply.
Right. Not the plants though. And I think that's the important part, right? That's the important point is.
And really every Middle Eastern country where we work in, whether it's, Abu Dhabi or Dubai or Saudi Arabia, they've all got some version of LEED type of an approach. And I was working this morning on a project where they want us to conserve 80% of the water from the baseline calculation, which is extremely difficult to say, this is your baseline, reduce it by 80%. That's a tremendous goal. And we're playing with it. We're trying to figure out how it's going to happen. We've done all the irrigation portion we can. We're using the highest efficiency systems that they are available and they accept. Now it comes down to plant materials, and those lush plants on your background there would not fly, Richard. So,
Desal or not, they're not flying
so
there. Yeah, 80%. That seems like an unreasonable expectation.
I believe it is. I believe it is. I think we were coming in at about 60% reduction from baseline, which I thought was very good. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of these things are cookie cutter. You know, they say, okay, we want you to go 80%. Well, you can do that in like a streetscape or in a green belt area, because you're going to use really low water use plantings that are, you know, you see them from a distance. But if you start getting into an urban environment where you're sitting at a planter next to a bench, you know, you may not want to be sitting next to, you know, a cactus or a crown of thorns or some other kind of plant that's really low water use, but maybe isn't the best in an urban environment.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. So, Lance, let's talk about regulatory changes or policies, right? We talked about smart controllers already. This, I think you said, is going to continue to grow. We'll probably have more regulation. What do you see these regulations as being, and what's a worry to you?
Well, I think they continue to, you know, push, like I said, for plant materials that are getting much lower in water use. The WELO does say now that 75% of the plants within the new WELO, if it passes, and it probably will be that in a residential condition, 75% of the plants should have a plant coefficient of less than 30% of ET, or 30% is their goal. And then in non-residential, which means commercial sites, things like that, we'll have to have 100% of the plants be that. And from an irrigation standpoint, we can irrigate that fine, but we do work hand in hand with our clients to help develop the water strategy. And sometimes it's really hard to get those low water use plants that really create the desired effect within the landscape. I'm also concerned that I see that, you know, the big push to continue dropping these allowable, you know, water use levels. And, you know, currently we're at 55% of ET for residential and 45 for non-residential. Yeah, this current WELO doesn't show any reduction from that, but I'm sure that's going to come. I'm sure they're going to push for that to be lower. And it comes down to a certain point that, you know, we're really struggling to meet those goals.
Yeah. So WELO stands for Water Efficient Landscape Ordinance for California,
Correct.
right?
Correct. And California does kind of set the trend on a lot of environmental laws. So, you know, I can see some of these other states, like you're saying, Nevada and Colorado, maybe, you know, taking parts of those ordinances and incorporating them into their own. We're kind of the test bed in California for a lot of these things.
Yes, so here's the one thing I think a lot of people think about is I think all these mainly apply to new construction. And as I look around where I live, 99% of the homes have been around for 20, 30, 40, 50 years.
Yeah.
And I don't think any of this is applying to them. Is that correct?
That is correct. And there's a lot of places out there. If you think about all the construction was done from the 1940s up until the 2000s, you know, we got 60 years of projects that have gone in, and certainly a lot of those landscapes have been renovated. But there's a lot of landscapes from the 60s and 70s that are still using those old systems, those old spray systems. We see it all the time. We get brought in to redesign the landscaping in a certain area of the project, and we walk around and we find really old irrigation product. And you know, they're not even close to using the kind of, you know, high efficiency projects that we're using now on new landscapes. And so you can basically say those are all systems that are probably working at best 50% efficiency. And there's a lot of water waste going on there that could be improved. And I know it's probably not desirable to a lot of people to push renovation of landscapes onto people who've owned their homes or owned their businesses or their apartment complexes for a long time. But there's a lot of water savings that could happen if that were done.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, even the mention of wood pipes in LA earlier, right? You start to think what's out there and how long it's been there. I mean, a lot of the schools I visit still have galvanized pipe. And
it's been a while, but you know, few years back, we were going out to some schools in the Los Angeles area that still had hydraulic controllers, where instead of wires, they had hydraulic tubes that ran out to every valve on the job site. And every one of those systems was leaking. You'd open up the box and there was just a puddle of water, and they're constantly leaking.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Lance, this next question is about drip irrigation or micro irrigation in general. And do you think it's going to have a big impact on the industry in the next 3 to 5 years? I mean, are sprays and rotors done and everything's going to be moving to drip?
I don't think that everything will be moving to drip, because there are still some really good applications for overhead spray. I mean, the development of some of these multi-stream nozzles that Rainbird and Hunter have now that really increase the efficiency. That's great. You start looking at slope irrigation, and when you start looking at costs to irrigate a slope, like with a hydroseed or something like that on it, drip is really not efficient in those situations. I mean, it's hard to germinate a hydroseed from 2+ inches below the ground. So I think there's still those applications, and I'm still a fan of overhead spray for sports fields and large turf areas and parks and recreational areas, because I think that the efficiencies have gotten quite a bit better, and they're easier to maintain. And there's a lot of pitfalls with subsurface drip in certain applications. I mean, but it is certainly growing. And I think the industry has really accepted drip irrigation, especially tubing style drip irrigation, because it is less expensive than point source irrigation. And I think where point source really shines is when you start dealing with like more desert type irrigation, like you might see in Arizona and Nevada, where you have plants that are separated by areas of rock mulch. You don't need to water the rock mulch. Let's water just the plant, and those make a lot of sense, and we see that continuing to be the trend.
Yeah, that's interesting too, from that standpoint too of turf going away, more point source, and you can certainly see the trends that way. And I like your point too about taking what you need for maybe overhead irrigation, making it more efficient.
Exactly. But I agree that we probably in years past have overused turf. And if you go to certain parts of the country, you still see a lot of turf going down. But in areas where water conservation is necessary, I don't see any reason why we shouldn't be reducing turf. But we should reduce turf to be, useful turf. And let's face it, we all love going out and throwing the ball around with the kids and throwing the frisbee with the dog, all those kind of things. We like lawns for those things. And so, those are ones that we need to keep. And, we need to make sure that people have access to good recreational areas, and lawns are a big part of that. And I think we'll continue to see that. And I think overhead spray is still going to be the go-to for large turf areas in the coming years.
Yeah, oh, and I kind of like that, right? It's middle ground. It's not extreme one way or the other.
Yeah. That's it. That's
yeah.
it.
Well, Lance, this has been a fabulous session. This went by super fast, and I can't believe all the information that came out of this. You have any parting thoughts before we say goodbye to our audience today?
Well, I think if you live in California, reach out to your representatives. Take a look at AB 1573 and 1572. See what you think about it. I mean, you may fall on one side or the other, but it's in the Senate now, and if it passes through there, that'll probably get signed into law. And I think there's some things that would really change the industry. And I like to promote people, developing plants that are beautiful, that use less water, and I don't want to see every landscape look just like the hillsides that surround it. I mean, I think we need to accept that there's going to be some plant materials that are not necessarily native, but are beautiful and very water conservative, and we should continue to push that.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you mentioned that, Lance, because I think these are happening right now as we speak, and I know none of my neighbors know about it. Right. But those are going to impact the way we all live. So, yeah, we do have to start educating and promoting that this is happening, and share our views.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Well, Lance, thanks so much for coming on today. We really appreciate it. Like I said, your knowledge in this industry and what's happening, no one else has it. So we really appreciate getting that information.
Well, you're too kind, Richard. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Appreciate you all attending.
Yeah. And yeah, I wanted to say thank you to everybody who joined today. We know you've got busy days these days, especially June and landscaping. So we really appreciate you spending some time with us. Remember, we've got over 300 of these trainings on the janesusa.com website /trainings. And remember, they're all free. And you can also get some Irrigation Association credits for watching those as well. So enjoy that. And also, wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, we extract all this audio out, put it on a podcast. And I know many people are enjoying that too. So anyway, Lance, thanks again for being here. Thank you,
You're
everybody.
welcome.
We're going to be back next week to talk about some ag irrigation subjects with Corey Brown. So thanks again, Lance.
Thank you. Talk soon.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye now.